Good day. I will be sharing my paper with you entitled Analyzing Women-Led Resistance and Political Education in Sister Stella L through Iris Marion Young's model of inclusive democracy. Philippine cinema has historically served as a dynamic mirror for the country's evolving socio-political and cultural landscapes. During the repressive martial law era, pioneering films shifted away from the conventional female archetypes to portray women with profound political agency and systemic awareness. Mike De Leon's Sister Stella L stands as a pinnacle of this movement, capturing the intersection of faith, labor resistance, and feminist activism against a dictatorial regime. The objective of my paper is to analyze how Sister Stella L serves as a medium for political education by demonstrating how marginalized groups challenge authoritarian power through grassroots resistance and adversarial political engagement. This paper utilizes Iris Marion Young's theory of inclusive democracy, an activist challenge to explore this cinematic masterpiece. Iris Marion Young's political theory on inclusive democracy and the activist challenge provides a powerful lens for understanding how marginalized groups build and deploy collective power. Her framework offers a comprehensive lens to understand how marginalized actors confront structural inequalities, disrupt exclusive institutional boundaries, and assert their political agency within a repressive system. Young challenges the assumption that social, political, or labor conflicts can be resolved solely through polite debate within established channels. She argues instead that true democracy demands a citizenship that embraces mobilized dissent. To ground these democratic theories within the specific realities of the Philippines during the martial law period, my study draws on the foundational work of Sister Mary John Manansan. Sister Manansan's evolution from a traditional academic nun to a radical socio-political activist proves significant in the Philippine progressive movement. This era demonstrated the shift of women religious from a passive detached theology to active frontline political activists alongside the working class. Ultimately, this analysis of how these women subverted their institutional positions to build highly effective resistance networks prompted Roses in 2008 to define them as transnational feminists. Sister Manansan's synthesis of third world feminism, liberation theology, and institutional subversion remains a foundational blueprint for democratic resistance and social justice in the global South. The second golden age of Philippine cinema serves as a powerful platform for urban realist films to provide socio-political critique despite strict dictatorial censorship. Roca's Maynila sa Kuko ng Liwanag and Ora Pro Nobis and Bernal's Manila by Night are fearless commentaries on society and feature characters who morally challenge the political status quo and serve as a critic of Marcos's dictatorship. June Lana's The Barber Tales in 2013 looks back at the martial law period to examine themes of traditional machismo, institutionalized gender roles, and female empowerment. These recent film portrayals serve as a record of the women's evolution from passive victims into active agents of political resistance. This directly subverts earlier martial law cinema, which, as Arcon de la Cruz in 1998 laments, promoted the submission of women and children to a forced patriarchal authority, normalized humiliation and violence, and reduced female representation to weak-willed, passionate, emotional archetypes that ultimately hindered both women's self-realization and national development. Specifically, a research gap exists at the intersection of visual semiotics, women-led resistance, and active political engagement. Visual signs, like a nun's habit or political propaganda, are often treated by current literature as background settings rather than catalysts for collective resistance and political education. My paper addresses this gap by applying Young's model of inclusive democracy to the film Sister Stella L, grounded in the localized real-world praxis of Sister Mary John Mananzan and utilizing Barth's semiotic framework. Ultimately, this paper advances film scholarship by showing how visual science and cinema actively construct a framework for democratic resistance against structural violence. My paper employs Sister Stella L, who is analyzed as a dynamic cultural text whose representation of the Filipino women is inextricably linked to socio-political crises, structural oppressions, and collective resistance during the martial law period. My study examines how these representations of power, dissent, and collective action operationalize the dynamic progression within Young's framework, moving from structural inequality to the limits of communicative democracy, and ultimately the necessity of the activist challenge. To establish how the film directly connects to the socio-political events of the period, the analysis began with a conceptual mapping by situating the film alongside the labor strikes and religious activism of the 1980s. Second, the film was viewed iteratively to identify specific scenes, dialogue, and character interactions through thematic content analysis. Specifically, the analysis evaluates three distinct dimensions of this dynamic progression: structural inequality and exclusive communication, examined through scenes that depict institutional boundaries and enforcement of passive compliance, communicative, communicative democracy and internal efficacy, analyzed through community organizing scenes that demonstrate the collective dialogue necessary to challenge marginalized status, and the activist challenge, illustrated through factory strike scenes that capture adversarial political action and the mobilization of collective power against deeply entrenched injustices. The following slides maps the dominant power structures within Sister Stella L and examines how the film dramatizes the dynamic progression of Young's framework. So we start with structural inequality and exclusive communication. Sister Stella L visually and narratively maps the pervasive intersecting power structures dominating Philippine society during the martial law period. Institutional exclusion and hegemonic power structures are cinematically represented through the repressive authoritarian state, the conservatism of the religious institution, and the pervasiveness of structural patriarchy. The visual representations of factory workers on strike in front of the Republic Oil Factory, as seen on the slide, powerfully capture the oppressive climate and the economic hardships endured by marginalized Filipinos during the martial law period. These scenes symbolize the resistance of the marginalized against exploitation and injustice at the hands of the privileged and highlight how the government exerts control through coercion and aggressive tactics towards factory workers. The prolonged and centralized powers of the dictatorial regime served as the primary dominant power structure emphasized in the film. Emmanuel Reyes in 1989 highlights that the severe absence of press freedom and widespread human rights violations by the military were notable during this period. Visual objects, such as newspaper and poster captions, as seen on the slide, serve as a tangible record of the events and social unrest, showing that the enforcement of political power results in the curtailment of freedom of expression and substantive political engagement. An equally dominant power in Philippine society during this period is patriarchy, which emphasizes dominance in family structures and larger social institutions, and exhibits extensive control over culture, sexuality, economy, and the state. This systemic insulation is mirrored in the domestic sphere of the women of Barrio Agujo. In this setup, the wife generally manages the domestic sphere and cares for children and husband, while the husband, as the household's head, provides for the economic needs of the family. Next is communicative democracy. The capacity for adversarial political engagement is not immediately evident in the initial journey of Sister Stella inside the convent, an environment initially defined by structural inequality and exclusive communication that isolates the nuns from broader social realities. Instead, her gradual participation in open discussions and her exposure to the community served as a vital form of experiential learning that will later catalyze her transition towards radical political resistance. As the film progresses, the development of Sister Stella's character is seen through her frequent visits to Barrio Agujo and her attendance at the strike, which shows her agency through her engagement with the striking laborers and her articulation of their collective sentiments. The latter part of the film shows political engagement and activism. It shows Sister Stella's shift from passivity to a fearless engagement in political activism. Young argues that when powerful institutional interests refuse to engage in fair democratic deliberation, marginalized groups utilize tactics such as strikes, pickets, and public demonstration to challenge powerful systems. Sister Stella L was a daring act of cinematic protest, with its unflinching warning against remaining apolitical in the face of injustice. Sister Stella's portrayal directly challenged the traditional cultural construction of the feminine as beauty queen, wife, and mother. Instead, she presented the woman as a militant activist. Decades after the release of Sister Stella L, the film's depiction of violence and human rights abuses continue to find chilling parallels in present-day realities. The activism of these women, which is focused on acts of oppression committed against marginalized groups, powerfully demonstrates the political activism portrayed by Sister Stella and the women in the film in the face of contemporary abuses and inequalities. The film demonstrates that political education is a dynamic process of political engagement and awakening that occurs when marginalized individuals actively step into the public sphere. For Sister Stella and the women of Agoho, the factory picket line becomes their actual classroom. This paper advocates that Sister Stella L must be viewed more than just a cinematic achievement, but as a vital medium through which intergenerational memory and historical legacy profoundly shape contemporary social and political consciousness. Consequently, this paper recommends that future scholarship on feminist film studies continue to utilize and adapt Iris Marion Young's framework of structural inequality and the activist challenge to further explore the intricacies of women-led resistance in other Philippine cinematic works. Ang demokrasya ay hindi dapat manatiling isang palabas na pinapanood lamang. Bagkus, ito ay isang panawagan para sa sama-samang pagkilos at daan tungo sa panlipunang pagkatuto. Through the lens of Iris Marion Young's activist challenge and the real-world praxis of Sister Mary John, this study demonstrates that women-led resistance transforms physical spaces of exclusion into dynamic environments for political pedagogy. Sister Stella L remains more than a cinematic achievement. It is a vital medium of intergenerational memory that continues to challenge institutional structures and inspire contemporary mobilization in the Global South. Maraming salamat sa inyong panahon at pakikinig.